Hi there. My name is Dan Merrick, and we are doing our Ask Me Anything office hours for Ruby. This is our opportunity for our students to be able to ask our culinary instructors live questions about anything food related. So, again, my name is Dan Merrick. I'm the Director of Plant-Based Culinary and Development. My expertise is primarily in plant-based foods. I have a strong expertise in whole food plant-based as well, but can definitely section outside of that a little bit too if you have questions about some of those. A little bit of house cleaning before we start. The way you can actually interact with this question and answer process is by looking at the video on the Ruby platform, and you'll see a little box on the right-hand side of this video that says Add Question Here. So all you have to do is type in your question and then hit the little black add button underneath it. And that'll actually be moderated out. And then we'll show up on our queue on the right-hand side underneath all the other questions that you see here. Now, if you notice in some of those questions, there's a heart icon on the right-hand side. Now, you can hit the heart icon and that will give it a vote to be able to be answered quickly as well. So it can go on the top. So if you see another question on there that you like, you can always hit the heart icon and it'll actually move all of those other ones up. In the same way, if somebody likes your question, they can also have that moved up as well too. So we're going to dive right into our questions here to be able to make sure we get through all of them. And if you do have questions, feel free to add them on the side there. All right, I'm going to start with Toki. Is it best to detox first before going plant-based? Should I be detoxing on a regular part, or should detoxing be a regular part of your plant-based lifestyle? Well, that is entirely up to you. So, it's different for every single person. And I think that the best advice we can give as a chef, because I'm not a doctor, I'm trained as a chef, would be to talk to some other people that have done it, talk to some of your friends that have done it as well, and see what they think about that. When I first went on to a whole food plant-based diet, I did not do a detox, but it ended up being kind of a detox on its own, just because what I was eating before was not very, it was definitely full of more fats and more oils and more processed food. So when I switched over to a whole food plant-based diet, my body definitely went through a detox, and I could see that a little bit. So, it's really up to the individual person. If you feel like you want to do a detox before starting the whole food plant-based diet, that's totally fine. And if you're going just plant-based, you definitely want to keep that a plant-based detox. But is it something that you have to do? No. Is it recommended? I mean, I probably would say that's, again, totally up to you. I didn't do it, and most of the people I know didn't detox before doing a plant-based diet. But if that's something you feel inclined to do, that's fine. You might want to check with your doctor before doing anything too drastic as far as a detox, depending on what that means to you. But the best advice I think I can give you is to talk to some friends, some colleagues that might have done this as well, and then also just check with your physician or doctor before making any drastic changes before going into a detox like that. I hope that helps. And if you have more questions on that, you can always type in more. All right, Ellen, do you prefer a non-stick pan for oil-free sautéing? And how do you feel about stainless steel for that? So that's an interesting question because on the platform for Ruby for our classes, we typically show the we usually show the no oil saute done in a stainless steel pan. And the reason we do that is because we want to be able to show the mercury effect with the little bit of water in the pan to be able to kind of float around in that. Now, that's great and it works fine. But personally, I actually typically use a nonstick pan to do that same process. Now, I've been doing it long enough that I actually know when my pan is hot enough to be able to do that no oil saute. So there's definitely a little bit of expertise and a little bit of practice that kind of goes along with that. Now, that being said, I also use stainless steel when I can. I use non-stick depending on what it is that I'm cooking. If I know I'm going to have a lot of things that might stick into it, I'll typically use a non-stick pan. More often than not, I use a nonstick pan as kind of a general pan. But I do have a couple rules around my nonstick pans. And the biggest one is if there are any scratches in the bottom of the pan, I instantly get rid of it. Because any of the chemicals that are used in nonstick pans, I don't want to have those in my food. Now, along with that same thing, my other rule with nonstick pans is never use any kind of metal spatulas or any kind of metal spoons inside of a nonstick pan, because that could end up scratching the surface of the pan and making those scratches on it. So, along with those first two things, I don't buy expensive nonstick pans because of that same reason. Because if I get a scratch on one, I don't want to feel like, oh man, I just, bought this really expensive pan and I'm not going to get rid of it because it has one little scratch in the coating on it. And some people might argue to say, well, the more expensive pans have better coating on them, but we're not talking about a huge difference between them. They might have a little bit. So what I do is I usually buy, a nonstick saute pan from a restaurant supply store. So it's something like 20, maybe $30 for the nonstick pan. And then they last me a year or two, usually about 2 years and sometimes longer because I'm careful with them. And if anything does get scratched, it's usually from somebody else being in my kitchen on them, and that's fine. But I also don't feel bad about, if I have to afterward recycle them or, get rid of them, because I can replace it with another $20 to $30 pan from the same restaurant supply store. Um, so that's pretty much what I do personally on stainless steel versus nonstick. Again, most of the time I'm using nonstick pan for simple sautés, but if I'm doing other, soups, things like that, in stainless or sauces, I'll do those in stainless. But yeah, it kind of depends on what I'm doing for each one. But typically, my sautés that I'll do like a tofu scramble or something in, I'll typically use a non-stick. I do use a wok a lot of the times, just not neither of those, but that's a whole different thing. But yeah, so there we go. All right. And ideas on what to do when traveling in areas that don't support whole food, plant based, and things to carry to snack. Yeah. So that's actually a great question. And I do this all the time because my wife and two children and I travel quite a bit via car across the country. And we do a lot of different things. We drive a lot, big trips from either Austin, Texas, up to Wisconsin here. So we have to plan ahead for that quite a bit. And the biggest thing to do, I always say, is pack two coolers of things. And I don't do the big plastic coolers. I usually do the bag coolers, so they're just easier to do. And then I can restock them kind of every night as I need to. Now, things that I actually travel with, I'm going to do a lot of, kind of snacks that are easy to be able to have on the road. So, like different nuts and seed mixes, but I do them in smaller baggies. So we're not just constantly eating out of the big bag because you can run out of how much of those you've eaten over time. So, doing small little bags or small little resealable containers typically it's what we kind of pack up. And we'll have nuts and seeds packed in those. We'll do granola bars. You can make some of those that travel pretty well, especially if you have a refrigerated bag, or not refrigerated bag, but a bag that you can be iced down. And then we'll typically make our meals for each day, basically as we're going. And I usually travel with two of those bags because one of them is kind of packed with like a lot of ice and things that aren't prepared yet. So, I can keep them cool. And then the other bag kind of stays a little closer to us so we can access different sandwiches or different things that we've made to be able to kind of get out easy as well. So, along with just some simple snacks that you might just have at home to be able to pack like that. We also do like different sandwiches. We'll do like a vegan quesadilla that's just kind of folded over with some different veggies into it. Because after it kind of solids up a little bit after it cools down, which is nice. Um, my girls love the little Seaweed snacks, it's definitely a top fave for them as well too. So really kind of think about what is best portable for you. Now, again, I do it via car, but you can also do it like when you're traveling on the airplane, or an airplane or a train or anything like that. You are allowed to bring food into airports, which is really nice. So the last time I just traveled a couple weeks ago to do some shooting for some new recipes, I left very early in the morning and I brought my tofu scramble with me on the road and had it in my wrap. And they definitely opened it up because it was, contained in some tin foil, and it looked very odd. But that tofu scramble was, what got me through the morning until I actually landed on the other side of the country, which was great. So, part of that is just thinking ahead. Like if you're eating something at home, a lot of those things that you're eating at home will just look for a handheld version of it. So, looking for some of those whole grain wraps, whole grain breads that'll actually hold up very well for you. Try not to put wet items on those too, because they'll typically soak through and become really soggy and fall apart. So, things like tomato, we might pack tomato in a separate container and then put the tomato on the sandwich or the wrap, after the fact to make sure that it's not going to soak through and get too wet. So, easy to grab snack foods, really the best advice I can give for it. And then otherwise, just looking at those sandwiches, those wraps, kind of things that are easy to eat on the road, I think are probably the best ways to be able to look. And then even, when you're doing airports and things like that, it's fine to be able to bring your own foods in. They might check it just because, when they see high dense plant matter and stuff like that, they're typically going to open up your bag, and that's fine. If they want to check out my my tofu scramble wrap, I have no problem with that. So I hope that helps, Ann. All right, Jimmy, how to make garlic oil. I have a bunch of garlic cloves from last fall's harvest. Stick neck garlic. Okay, so garlic oil is a pretty simple thing to be able to make. Typically, what you want to do is just take your cloves of garlic. You want to definitely take all the skins and everything off of them, so you just have the cloves themselves. Put them into a pan and then cover with oil, and then bring that to just a simmer, basically, for about 15 minutes. It's typically about how much time it would take. You can go a little bit longer. You'll see the garlic start to kind of turn color. It'll turn brown a little bit. That'll give you more of a kind of a roasted garlic flavor, which some people like, which is great. But yeah, so just cooking the oil or cooking the garlic in the oil for about 15 to 20 minutes, letting it cool down and then putting it into a jar, and then make sure to store that jar in the refrigerator so you're not getting anything that kind of gets into that jar, because it won't be as shelf stable as the oil is originally. And any kind of oil will work. A lot of people like to use olive oil because of the flavor on it. You're just simmering it, so it should be fine. But you could use other types of oil like avocado oil or other high heat oils would be just fine. It kind of depends on what you're using it for after the fact, if you want to use a high heat versus an olive oil. Hope that helps, Jimmy. All right, Patricia, is there a template for writing recipes? How do you go about finding a cookbook publisher? Thank you. Well, those are two. Well, let's start with the recipes. So, recipe formats are typically you're going to have your name and you're going to have the name of the recipe, and then you're going to put how many it serves. So, it makes this many, servings. About how much time it would take is a great thing to have on the top of that. We typically do that in Ruby. Not every publisher does that. And then you go onto your method. Now, of course, a lot of different recipes will have a description at the top of a story of something like this is, my grandma used to make this pasta sauce or something like that. And you'll see on websites, a lot of times it's really, really long and a lot of different advertisements in between there. And you can do that, like in a book, you would see a shorter description or something like that too before a recipe, or not. It's okay not to. But then you get into your ingredient list. Sorry. So, ingredient list is after you do how many it's going to serve. And so if it's a pasta sauce, you're just going to list your ingredients by order of which you use them, right? So if you're making a pasta sauce, maybe you're going to start with some olive oil and sauteed onions. And so olive oil would go at the top of your list, then sauteed, or then your diced onions, and then maybe the next step in that is your garlic and sweating off your garlic. So garlic would be your next ingredient, and of course next to each one of those, how much. So a tablespoon of olive oil, a quarter of a diced yellow onion, and then 2 cloves of minced garlic, and then a can of 15-ounce can of Romo tomatoes, whole or whatever, crushed, whatever you want to be able to do those. And then, so as you write the recipe and the method, each one of these should basically follow your method going through. So after your ingredients, then you have your method, and the method is how it all happens. So the method is basically saying, from step one, you want to heat your pan to this, put your oil in, your 2 tablespoon of oil, and heat until shimmery. And then your next line would be add the diced onions and stir on a medium high heat until transparent or whatever, and then add your garlic, minced garlic, and cook for another minute or whatever, and then continue basically through the same process that your ingredients are kind of laid out on the top. So that's kind of like a very average way to write recipes. You can put little notes at the bottom too, if you're like, I love to use Roma tomatoes that are crushed in this recipe, but if you can't find the crushed ones, whole ones are fine. Or if you can't find Roma tomatoes, that's fine to be able to use this type or whatever. But yeah, that's kind of a standard writing style. So the second part of your question is, how do you go about finding a cookbook? Okay, I read that wrong. So, oh no, yeah, cookbook publisher. So, that's kind of a personal thing that you're going to have to do, because there's a lot of different ways to do this. Finding a publisher is one thing, but you might want to talk to an agent beforehand too, or you might want to skip a publisher altogether and do a self-publishing yourself, which there are a lot of great ways to be able to do that now too. You can do digital books, you can do hard copy back books of, doing publishing a book yourself. That's more finding a printer to be able to do, but then you need to find a distributor for those as well. Um, you know, uh, Book agents are a good place to be able to start if you really want to go down some of those heavier roads too, to be able to say like, okay, I have this great idea for a cookbook that nobody's ever done before. And an agent would do all the other stuff for you. They'd find the publisher for you, and all the other kind of steps for that. Now, if you are wanting to do a cookbook, there's definitely a lot of steps that are involved in that too. So, not only a publisher, an agent, but you'll have to think about recipe testers, so people to test your recipes to make sure your recipes are, working properly. You'll need a photographer. You need to make all the recipes, to take the pictures too. So, there's a lot of different steps in making a cookbook, and a lot of them you can do yourself. And you can always do like a first draft of a book too, to be able to pitch to a publisher if you'd like to. But there's a lot of different avenues in cookbook publishing. So I don't want to steer you down one in particular route, because there's so many different ways to do it. There are a lot of book agents that will take time to sit down with you to kind of see what your thoughts are on things. And then you can decide if you want to go, a certain way with them, because a lot of people might hire somebody to help them with their cookbook as well. It's like where they pay them a certain amount of money, and then they'll like do all the writing formats and everything for them, and they're just more used to writing cookbooks. Or you might want to write the whole thing yourself. So there's a lot of different avenues to be able to make that happen. I know that's not the perfect answer for you, Patricia, about the cookbook publisher, but that's a pretty big question, in a small sentence there. What I would recommend is looking up some ways to self-publish a book. There are a lot of different YouTube videos on self-publishing that you might want to take a look at, and then maybe look up a couple, agents that you might think of. Now, if you're looking for a specific publisher, like a publisher, and you already know what you want, you might want to look at some of your favorite cookbooks and see who published those, and then approach them to say, look, I have this book idea. I'd love for you to be able to publish it. It's kind of a hard avenue, because I get a lot of pitches for things. That's why I think an agent might be a good idea, because they're really used to agents and, their process through that. But that's completely personal to you. So I hope that helps, Patricia. All right, Anne, what is the best way to store fresh turmeric? I store turmeric like I do mushrooms. I keep them in a paper bag in the fridge. So, it's just a small paper bag. I just wrap it up so it's a little tight, but it breathes a little bit better. I have friends that just keep it just in the crisper drawer, which is, I guess, works. But my favorite way to keep fresh turmeric is definitely in a paper bag. All right, Yvonne. I've been doing the dicing exercises, and after all these years, I'm feeling inept with chopping. Suddenly, I'm aware of how I hold the knife, among other things. When a recipe says to dice, are they referring to the smallest dice cut, or does it matter? That's a great question. And the more you do these exercises, the more they're going to feel comfortable if you're doing them correctly. So, you're talking about the way you're holding your knife. That's a good thing to be able to kind of start with. So, I'm just looking for something I can hold in my hand to show as an example. But I'll use my glasses case here. So, let's just pretend that this was a knife. I'm going to hold it by the end and I want to wrap one finger around and then put my thumb on the other side of that basically. And then I'm going to rock my knife basically like that. So I have my hand, it's like I have the blade between my thumb and forefinger, and then the handle is, pretend it's right there between there. So that way I'm actually going up and down. You want to make sure not to have like your finger on top of the blade like this, but it's kind of pinching the blade on each side, then holding the handle kind of like that. You'll be able to rock up and down. Sorry, I'm using the glasses case for it, but it's the only thing I had at hand here to make that happen. So starting with that is a really good place to start. And definitely check out the knife skills videos we have. It's a good, just for good basics of kind of starting where you're at with just holding your knife. Now, as far as dices go, it's really funny because when people use the term dice generally, and I mean, historically, dice is the size of an actual dice, right? So, a small dice is about a quarter inch by a quarter inch thick. Like that would be something for like a soup or mirepoix, and like a salsa. A medium dice is about a half inch by half inch, which is good for stews. And a large dice is about a 3/4 inch by 3/4 inch, which you might like roast, vegetables at, so it's kind of a larger dice, but that's kind of your different sizes of those. Now we have different charts on those different sizes as well. They're different size for julienne, brunoise, other sizes of those too. But dice is a term that's kind of used very sporadically, right? Like, so when we say a dice, they're like, it's usually a specific size for something for that. But if you're doing home cooking stuff, a dice is basically, it depends on what you're making. Like if you're making like a salsa or something where, you're just going to have the ingredient just at the same size, you want to make sure that it just fits on your spoon or your fork well enough to be able to get that ingredient plus a couple others. Whereas the larger dice, the 3/4 by 3/4 inch or something like that. And, that would be used for something like roasting vegetables. So part of that is just knowing what the product is going to be in to be able to get the right size for you as a home cook, and just keeping that in mind. All right, so I have another one from Yvonne. How long do you recommend keeping spices, and what is the best way to store? I've heard they should be changed out of a certain period of time. Yes, that's so true. So you can keep the spices in the jar that they came in, or the container that they came in. I typically buy, kind of depending on where I'm getting them, but I usually buy them where they're already sealed in a container, so it could be just one of the little jar kind of things that they're sealed in, and then you can just undo the seal on them. And as soon as I undo the seal, I put the date on the bottom that I did it, just the month and the day, because typically dried spices last about a year after you've opened them. Now, if they've been sealed and on the shelf for many, many years, they're definitely going to lose their flavor as well. But once they're open to air, just a little bit like that, they're going to start losing their flavor. And about the year period is about that's about the time where you start to see a gradual decline in the flavor of them. Can you use, the cinnamon that's been on your counter or in your cupboard for 2 years? Yes, you totally could. It's not going to kill you, but it's going to take a lot more of that cinnamon or a lot more of that thyme or whatever it is to be able to get more flavor out of it. Cinnamon's probably not the best example because it's a pretty potent one, but something like thyme or sage or something like that, you're definitely going to see that it's going to lose its flavor a lot after a year. So that's what I always do. And, I typically don't keep them in the jar they come in. I have these little, they look like little they're just resealable jars that have like a rubber seal around the top of it, and they kind of clamp down. I think I got them at the Container Store or something like that. So I actually transfer them all in there, and on the top of each jar it says what each one is, and then I put them in there, and that way I know they're sealed very well. And then basically put a little sticker on the bottom, or write usually in Sharpie on the bottom, and on glass that can wipe off after time, which is nice. But just putting the date on the bottom of the jar, always a good idea, so you at least know how long you've had them. I hope that helps. Here's another one from Yvonne. Is a honing rod the best slash ideal, the ideal slash best tool for honing a chef knife and sentoku knife? A honing tool came with my knife set years ago, but I guess I missed a detail that one should hone a knife every time you use it. Could you talk about that in the bench scraper? Yeah, and the bench scraper, sure. So a honing rod is a great tool, and I use mine almost every time I use a knife, but not every time. It depends on how sharp your knives are and how they're holding up. But if you do use a honing rod, often you're going to see that your blade retains its edge much longer, which is great. If you're feeling any kind of resistance right away in your knife, go right to your honing rod first to see if you need to sharpen it or just hone it. Now, what a honing rod does basically is it kind of puts the blade in shape. So, in both these examples, like even on the Sentoku knife, we're talking about a blade that's sharpened on both sides. So, you basically, the blade is coming to a tip like this, and it goes right down the edge as this tip. Now, certain Japanese knives, one side might be flat and then just one side is like this, but both these examples are ones that are like this, and that's a great example for honing as well. So if you have this pyramid, over time, as it's pushing up, you're going to see that the top end of your knife, the blade, starts to kind of bend over to one side. And what the honing rod does is just kind of knock it back into place. And it depends, either way, but you basically want, instead of having it kind of knocked over from one side to the other, you want it to be as kind of straight as possible, making that. And it will happen even if you have a wide, base like that. But so the honing tool will actually help keep it, so it's not arched over to the side, which is, if you're trying to cut through something, having a tip on the end of it is much better than having a blunt edge like that as well. So the honing tool basically knocks it in, so it has a sharp point on it like that. So a honing tool is something you should use pretty often. You don't have to do it every time you use your knife, but like I said, I probably do it every couple times I use my knife, just to be able to keep my knives sharp. If you don't, you will definitely see that your knives won't keep their edges long, and they're not going to be as sharp as you think they are. So I would definitely recommend using it often. Let's see. And the next part was, can you talk about a bench scraper? Yeah. So bench scrapers are great because you'll see a lot of people, when you're done chopping ingredients, they'll take their knife along their cutting board and scrape up all their ingredients to kind of put it up to their hand and move it over. If you use a bench scraper instead of your knife to do that, you're going to keep the edge of your blade sharper, right? So if you're scraping the cutting board with your knife, that's just one more time you're basically presenting the knife to an edge and can get dull. But if you're using your bench scraper just to scrape something up, doesn't matter at all if your bench scraper is dull, because it's just basically picking up the items with it. So great tool to be able to have in the kitchen. If you're going to be doing a lot of chopping or dicing, I highly recommend doing it. They even make some now that, like they have like a little fold out, so it'll make like a scoop, basically bench scraper that kind of comes up, and it's easy to hold things in. So I love using those. I highly recommend them. They're dishwasher safe too. But it's basically just to keep your knife sharp. So bench scraper, wonderful thing to be able to have. All right, DP, why is it bad to eat olive oil? That is an interesting question. So I wouldn't say that it's bad, but there might be better options. So the reason that people try to avoid olive oil is highly because of the caloric intake. It's 120 calories per tablespoon of any kind of oil. It doesn't matter if it's olive oil or canola oil or avocado oil or coconut oil. It's 120 calories per tablespoon of oil. So if you're sautéing something in a pan, a lot of people will say put, 2 tablespoons of oil down in your pan to be able to start. Well, you're already adding 260 calories to your dish before you even put anything into it, right? So, the reason a lot of people try to avoid the olive oil is to be able to avoid the calories for it. Now, what I recommend is if people want to have oil, is basically to put a little drop in the bottom of the pan and then take a paper towel and wipe the bottom of the pan if you're trying to get the nonstick surface, because that's primarily what people are using oil for, is to make a nonstick surface on something. It is definitely not something that is needed, but the water saute method works actually quite well. So I wouldn't say that it's bad to have olive oil, but that's usually the reason that people are saying that, to avoid the oil because of the calories on it. Now, there are some other studies that have come out. The Dr. Esselstyn has had a couple too that has cardiovascular issues with it as well. I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to go too far down that path. But the caloric intake is basically why most people are trying to avoid the calories for it. All right. So Jackson, hello, Dan. When I'm making pastas with a butter sauce, I feel like I have a hard time getting the ratios right to get it to emulsify and become saucy and not just sitting in a puddle of melted butter. Any tips, ratio hacks for this? Yeah. So, Jackson, I'm assuming you're talking about actual butter, not vegan butter. Because if you're using vegan butter, it's a little harder and it kind of breaks down even quicker. But either of these, the trick to be able to make an emulsification out of butter is to be able to add a little bit of water. So what you typically want to do is start out with about, let's just say 2 tablespoons of water and bring it to a simmer in a pan, and then add about a tablespoon of butter at a time while you're whisking the butter too to be able to make it happen. And if it's like a really skinny pan, you can just tilt the pan a little bit on the side to be able to continue to whisk as you go. And add a tablespoon of butter at a time and use your whisk to be able to get that. And you'll start to see that as you're doing this, the water will help emulsify and kind of build out the air and in your butter as well. So it's a a very common trick to be able to do for that. Now, the trick to this is getting your whisk going so you can get a lot of air into it as well, and that will make your basic sauce. Now you can add all kinds of other things, but that's the basic technique to kind of start that out. Now, usually when you do that, it's not something you can reuse again later because the sauce will break, it will separate out, because water and butter, or the water and oil, do not mix. They basically, what you're doing is creating a bunch of air inside of it, so you'll have to use that pretty quickly as well. Otherwise, it's going to turn into your puddle, or if you refrigerate it, it'll actually break, and you'll just have two separate things just separated out from each other. So yeah, emulsification, just add a tablespoon at a time to simmering water, and that'll get you going. All right, Lily, I'd like to start creating my own recipes. Any advice about different steps? Thank you. So that's great. Starting your own recipes is a wonderful step for any cook or home cook or chef to be able to really start venturing on your own. So, um, advice about different steps. Think about techniques that you're doing in your recipes. So, just like the one I was talking about with the butter here, um, you know, think about what steps have to come what in your recipes. So, for that butter recipe I was just talking about, where you're emulsifying the butter, that's typically something you want to do like after you've got your pasta cooked, right? So, if they're using it for like a pasta sauce, so you would, when you're writing your recipes, make sure that you have them in the order. So when you get to the bottom of the recipe, everything comes together really well. So you can have your first step being, your boiling of pasta and then draining, or you can have it intertwined, like, boil your pasta for 8 minutes uh, until just al dente, strain, and then start to emulsify your butter or something like that. So what you basically want to do is make sure that you're getting your techniques in the order that you need them to be able to be executed properly. So the dish at the end is done. So, and then the recipe that I was talking about earlier, that the technique or the order of how everything is, just start out with your ingredients in the order that they go into the dish. and then think out your method about exactly what you're going to do. I used to tell people this a lot when I used to train people on how to do cooking demonstrations. And what I used to tell them was like, act like you're doing a cooking demonstration on the news or on TV in your own kitchen and talk through it as you're doing it. That actually is great for building your own recipes too, because if you're at home and you're making a recipe you've made 100 times, doing that, on paper or on film or something is definitely different than you're just doing it at home. But if you act like you're on a cooking show, you can say like, okay, now I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of water to this, and I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of this herb, and then I'm going to mix this into it, or I'm going to emulsify here. But if you do that and you record yourself on your phone or something like that, you'll actually see the recipe coming to formation really quickly by doing that. So you'll see the different steps that you're just naturally doing on your recipe, and then you can write each one of those down to be able to make your recipe to make that work. I hope that helps, Lily. All right, Gail, can you provide a simplified shopping list for us? Even if verbally, the checklist is a little overwhelming. I'm just trying to figure out what I have to have before the food prep portion start. Thank you. So, Gail, I think what you're talking about is one of the class, in a lot of the classes we have, like a master, list of different things you might need, and that is an overwhelming list. There's like a lot of different ingredients on there. What I recommend doing is looking at the pace of the course that you're going through. So, if you know that you're going to go through, a unit per week or maybe 3 tasks per week or something like that, look ahead and see which one of those you're going to do, because a lot of our tasks will say like you can do this recipe or this recipe or this recipe, but you only need to complete one of them. And the shopping list that we have shows you ingredients for all 3 of those, right? So look ahead to be able to see, like, okay, you know what? I might want to do this recipe instead of this one, or I might want to do that one. And then look through your ingredients that you'd need on those ahead of time, because then you can take the tasks and really kind of portion them out for the week as you want to go, because you're definitely not going to take that whole shopping list and buy everything on that list just in one week, because it's portioned out over the entire period of the course that you're taking. So that's really what I would do, is kind of look ahead to say like, okay, how many of these tasks am I realistically going to get through for the week? And then make your shopping list yourself to be able to say like, okay, like I'm going to, I'm just, pasta keeps coming back to mind, but I'm going to make pasta this week. So, and I know it's going to be gluten free, right, for the gluten free task or whatever. So I'm going to need this much gluten free pasta. I'm going to need, to make a sauce. So maybe I want to do a walnut pesto. So I'll need walnuts and basil and salt and pepper and garlic, and maybe olive oil if you want it. But so that way you can list out all the ingredients that you actually need for it. Now, some of those too might be larger things, like like depending on the course you're doing, olive oil might be in there or it might not. But if it is olive oil, you don't want to just buy a small bottle of olive oil. You might want olive oil that you keep for a little bit longer. Or a bigger bottle that you can keep for a little bit longer. But things that are fresh, like the basil, well, you just want to get what you need for that week. You definitely won't want it for something for leftovers for the next week as well. So I hope that helps a little bit, just thinking a little bit ahead and also looking ahead. It's okay if you look ahead, as long as you don't click the complete button, you'll be fine with those as well. And for the graded tasks, they won't let you uh, click the button until you've actually submitted something. All right. So Susan, do you have any experience with making a walnut? Do you have any experience with making a walnut cream to use in recipes? In my area, raw cashews are not available, or not always available. Yeah, you can definitely use walnuts in cream recipes as well too. They are going to have a slightly different flavor. One of the reasons we usually use cashews is because they're a very kind of middle of the road flavor profile. And we use them as a replacement for fats a lot of times and creams. So if you're looking for like a heavier cream, a cashew is a great stand-in for that. Now, walnuts a lot of times will have a little bit more depth and kind of grittiness to them than a cashew would. So if you're looking to make like a bechamel or something like that, you might want to look at a different ingredient than just a walnut. It's also, you have to think about the colors on it too. Like almonds are okay, but they typically have a little, like that probably be closer to a cashew than a walnut would. I've done some out of macadamia nuts, but it's really hard to find good quality macadamia nuts in the United States that aren't rancid because nobody refrigerates them after opening. So make sure you do that. But yeah, walnuts can be used in a cream, and it really kind of depends on the recipes you're using them for. So like the bechamel, a walnut would work, but you might want to look at something like an almond instead. Or experiment with a couple different. Maybe use some almonds and a little bit of walnut. But the walnut has such a unique flavor profile to it. You taste it a lot more than you would a cashew or an almond. All right, hope that helps. Here's another one from Susan. Do you have any suggestions for dull/seaweed alternatives? The taste profile doesn't agree with my palate. So alternatives for seaweed really kind of depends on what you're making here too. There are some different like sea vegetables. Like I know there's this one called like sea bean. It's kind of a very salty, a little bit bitter to it. That's something that's good, but that's also kind of hard to find and kind of expensive too. I mean, honestly, if you're not a big fan of seaweed or dulse, I wouldn't look like the flavor of those. I wouldn't look for a replacement if you don't like it on your palate. I would say just keep it out for whatever you're doing. They like a lot of them can be kind of bitter, especially if you cook them longer. But also if you're doing like something like a mock tuna or something like that, you can just keep them out of that as well, so you don't have that flavor profile. Because honestly, if it doesn't agree with your palate, don't try to replace that flavor because it's also going to disagree with your palate. Hope that helps a little bit there. But yeah. Oh, here's one about a bechamel sauce. So, Chris, do you have a recommendation for a vegan, low oil, possibly nut free bechamel? Yeah. So, we teach a really simple one on Ruby of a cashew bechamel. And it's basically soaking the cashews overnight, draining them off, and then blending them with a little bit of vinegar, a little bit of lemon juice, and garlic and I think nutritional yeast, some simple ingredients, maybe a little salt and pepper in it. Now you could do the exact same thing and just not use the cashews, but use a white bean in it instead. So I do that a lot, where I'll use like a cannellini bean instead of the cashew, and that way it doesn't have any fat that's added to it as well too, and it still has a high protein, which is nice. So yeah, there are a couple different recipes on the bechamel that you can find for the cashews, but you can also sub out a cannellini bean instead and blend that up, and it gives a nice kind of flavor profile on that. And that's basically it. Just kind of depends on how much how much you're making. But like, let's just say 1 can of drained, uh, you know, uh, cannellini beans, like a 15-ounce can for maybe a couple cloves of garlic, a couple tablespoons of nutritional yeast, maybe a little bit of, I don't think I said garlic yet, but maybe a clove of garlic, maybe a clove and a half, depending on how much you like garlic. You can cook that before if you'd like to, unless you're cooking the sauce. Um, Maybe a little bit of onion powder, and then lemon juice, and a little bit of maybe champagne vinegar would make a nice bechamel out of cannellini bean instead of using the cashews. All right. So our next one, Anne, what would you substitute for leeks, which are rather pricey now in soups? Onions. I would totally go for an onion as well. Leeks are great. They definitely have a certain kind of flavor profile, but onions are going to be your closest to it. You can go with green onions, but you're not going to get quite there. But you can, the green part of the onion, use that as well too. So probably, a little bit of just like a standard yellow onion mixed in with a couple green onions that have been, sliced and as well to be able to make that happen, to get some of that same flavor profile. But quite honestly, you could just get away with the onions as well. Just make sure if you're doing it in a soup to do a saute on them before you put them in with all the other ingredients, so you get some of that nice flavor in there. And what I typically, if I'm doing a soup and it has onions or leeks in it, those are the first things in the pot, and I'm actually sauteing those to get a little bit of those natural sugars to release off, and then I'll rinse the bottom of the pot with a little bit of water to bring all the brown off the bottom of the pan back in, and then you start adding your other ingredients for your soup into it. So that should work for you, Anne. All right, Chris, add on to the garlic oil question. Suggestion for a no oil garlic or truffle oil. Uh, for a no oil garlic or truffle oil. So you're looking for an oil that's, let me read this again. Suggestions for a no oil garlic or truffle oil. I think what you're looking for is the flavor of garlic or truffle oil, but not the oil that's added into it. And so what I would do is I would roast your garlic. Um, so basically roast your garlic, and you can do it, just slice off the top. You can do it with a little bit of water in there. It might need a couple times to do it instead of oil. Put the water over it in aluminum foil, bake it off at 350 degrees about 20 minutes, but maybe check it every 6 minutes or so to be able to make sure it's not dry. So it's actually roasting the oil. It's going to take a little bit longer to do it using water instead of oil. So you might want to check it at 20 minutes. And if it squeezes out, great. But if not, it might need another 10, 15, depending, also on altitude. Now, once you get that roasted, you can do a puree of that garlic and mix it just a little bit of salt. And then you can actually add pure truffle into it if you'd like to, instead of the truffle oil. Just get a little bit of truffle and blend that up with your garlic and your truffle. You could do a little white bean into it as well too, so that we have kind of a spread that would work instead of the oil. As far as a liquid goes, so I mean, you could do vinegars and stuff, but that's going to be pretty overpowering on those. And if you're just doing a truffle, puree, that's going to be pretty expensive. But you could do the same thing with that too, but it would be pretty expensive. So if you're just looking to get the flavor, that's a great way to do it. A lot of times too, if I'll roast the garlic, I'll just take it, like if I'm putting it on crispy bread, I'll just like move it across the bread too. It'll make this nice garlic kind of puree across the entire thing. But if you're looking for a truffle oil substitute, I would probably mix it with garlic a little bit to be able to make that flavor pop. Hope that helps. That's a tough one. All right. So, Patricia, what is a good homemade spice blend that does not contain seeds? Wow, there are thousands and thousands of them out there. And it really depends on what you're cooking. So you could do a homemade spice blend that, you know, for all kinds of different things from yeah, that's such a big question. That's a really hard one to answer. I mean, because depending, like if you're doing a curry, I mean, curry is a spice blend, chili powder is a spice blend, and all those are without seeds as well too. But I mean, I guess you're using like cumin seed in it. um yeah, that's kind of hard one to pare down depending on what you're like. Patricia, if you're still on, definitely ask that question. Tell me what you're looking for specifically on spice blends and what you're looking for. Because like seeds, I think what you're probably thinking is like sunflower seeds or something like that. Probably not the seed of a plant like a cumin seed or something like that. But yeah, kind of too big of a question. If we can narrow that down a little bit, that would be great. All right, so Toki again. So I bought some hemp seeds and hemp milk to try for the first time. Any recipe suggestions? Anything I need to know on how the product behaves to incorporate into meals? Not too much, actually, which is great. Hemp milk and hemp seeds, you can use hemp milk just like you would like an almond milk. Depending on what you're using it for, will have different ways that it reacts. So hemp milk doesn't really like froth up as much as like an oat milk or something would. And but it does have a nice fat content to it. Hemp seeds are great because you can just scatter them over the top of things. So over salads, over soups, over oatmeal, all kinds of things. It's a great way. In fact, my mother-in-law does that every morning, where she'll put hemp seeds over the bottom of her on the top of her oatmeal and fruit, just to be able to put a little extra nutrients into it. So the seeds, really not too much to you have to worry about how it behaves. But for recipe suggestions, I use it almost just like an added nutrient into it. You don't really taste it a whole lot, so don't worry about that as much. But it's a great thing to be able to kind of put on like a crust or something like that too. So maybe you're making like a cashew cheese like roll, like we do in one of our classes. I think that's some macadamia nut cheese roll, where it's like a harder cheese, or the cheese that we do for our agar course, or our agar lesson in the pro Pro Plant course. You could do a crusted, hemp seed on the outside of one of those too, which is great, or just roll it, in the macadamia nut cheese. But they'll stick to it. It'll add just a little bit of, nuttiness to it, but not too much, which is great. And then the hemp milk, just try it in the way you normally do, and you'll probably be surprised. It reacts very much like other milks do, except for maybe the frothing if you use it for something like coffee. Okay, so Miriam, thanks to all the staff for the efforts. What are the important courses for every chef? Well, that depends on what kind of chef you want to be. So Ruby offers a wide variety of different courses. The plant-based pro is definitely a favorite for people that are looking for, a vegan lifestyle. The Forks Over Knives class is a great one for somebody going for a whole food plant-based course. That's no oil course at all. The plant-based pro is pretty darn close to that. In fact, we do substitutions when there are oil in there. And we try to make everything gluten-free in those two, at least alternatives, to have gluten-free versions. So you'll see like a gluten-free seitan in there, which is wild because seitan is just wheat gluten. So we came up with another version for people that were gluten-free. Other courses, we have our Pro Cook course, which is more of a kind of a standard course that incorporates meats and other ingredients into it as well too. If you're into seafood, Chef Barton Seaver created a course for us for sustainable seafood that's just fantastic. I don't eat fish personally, but I've had to review through them, and it's written very well. It is a great personality for it. Fran did an amazing vegan desserts class. It's just, everybody that I know in the whole food plant-based world just loves Fran's class in vegan desserts. So I think that that's a great way to, kind of dive into that world. If you're not vegan, there's a wonderful set by the French pastry school that that helped us make our pastry course, a bread making course, and a cake making course. 3 different courses, but there's a lot in them. So it's a great thing to be able to, kind of progress through the 3 of those as well. So, it depends on the importance and what you want to actually put your focus on. But those are 6 different courses that are kind of like some pretty stellar work that we've put out. There's also some other courses like the Jacques Pepin course, which is fantastic, where it really feels like Jacques Pepin is teaching you every single one. They're all video recipes instead of some of them video, some of them are text. This one is all video recipes, and he shows you amazing techniques to be able to use on a wide variety of things. That one does include fish and poultry in it as well, but not meat, like a red meat in it as well. But that's a great course, and it's kind of a go as you will as well. It's not like you have to do it in a certain amount of time. You can take your time with it and go back to it. So lots of different options out there that Ruby offers, and I highly recommend a lot of them. But there are also some sample courses to help you out to see each one of those to see which ones you like. Hope that helps, Miriam. All right, Alexandria, I'm new to this. Can you help me with a general recommendation for oil-free, no-nuts salad dressings? Yeah, there's actually quite a number of them. Depending on where you are, if you're taking the classes, like if you're doing oil-free and you're in like the Forks class, you will actually learn how to do different oil-free dressings. But there is an oil-free balsamic that's in there. That's actually a really simple one, that you can kind of change to be able to make sure, but you can like reduce down the balsamics on those as well. I like to do a cat or a Caesar dressing using silken tofu as well. So I don't use any oil in that as well, but I'll do like a dulse flake and some lemon juice, a little bit of vinegar, silken tofu, and I might put a little bit of dill and some other herbs in there to be able to make it more like the Caesar. You can also do a ranch dressing kind of in the same way, but all no oil, no nuts as well. So some easy ways to be able to make those happen. So you can do no oil and no nuts on those dressings. Hope that helps. But if you're in the courses, you can also go up to the right above your dashboard to the recipes, and you can search the recipes to look for dressings. And there's a wide variety of them. You can get the exact amounts for everything on those too. All right, Yvonne. Dan, folks may like to know how to make homemade veggie stock with all the remnants of veggies we use, the leftover pieces of skins and onions and garlic, celery leaves, carrots, etc. I save mine in the freezer until I have a full bag. I do the exact same thing. In fact, I've done that on a couple live events here to show people how to do it. So that's a great recommendation, Yvonne. So making a vegetable stock, I typically don't buy vegetable stock. I will save all the remnants from my vegetables as I'm cooking them. So my onions, I actually don't use the skins of garlic typically, but I will use onions just because they're so aromatic. I'll do the onions. I'll do celery, like the big kind of root ball and the leaves off of top. The carrot skins. I'll do potato skins sometimes too. Mushroom stems from like like just when you cut the mushroom stems off of them, I'll save those. The red pepper core as well. I'll use all of those things and put those into a big Ziploc bag or something like that, and then keep them in the freezer. And then I just keep adding to that until that bag is full. And once that bag becomes full, then I just dump the whole thing into a big stock pot, and then fill it up just past the where all the ingredients are, and then bring that to a boil and then down to a simmer. And I typically simmer mine for like 45 minutes. I get a nice deep, rich brown color out of it, which is great. And then I will put it through a strainer to strain out all the other stuff into big mason jars or whatever I've got. And you've got a great stock it's no fat, there's no salt in it. And you made it for free from leftover ingredients. So, I mean, I use that trick constantly every single week. I never have to buy stock because of it, and it's a great way to be able to use all of the scraps that typically just go right in the garbage or your compost. And then once they're broken down like that, they'll compost even quicker. Even in fact, my dog loves to eat all the carrots and stuff, like the carrot skins and stuff like that after I've been cooking them too. So I'll a lot of times put those into his dog food. He loves it. It's great. All right. So Miriam, oh, I think we already answered that one. Patricia, the spice blends. What spice flavors work well together? Okay, that helps a lot. So there's actually a great book called The Flavor Bible, and there's one called the Vegetarian Flavor Bible as well. But that actually gives you a wonderful like what flavors match with other flavors, which is a great place to kind of start. And it really helps on narrowing into what area of cooking you want to go into as well. So, some simple flavor combinations, like for Indian cooking, for like a curry, like I was talking about before, like a cumin, a turmeric, paprika kind of mixture into those things. Always wonderful herbs to be able to go together. If you're doing something more Italian, it might be something like oregano, and it might be basil and parsley. Those mixes go really well together. If you're doing something more like, I don't know, like a roast, like you're doing like like a lentil loaf or something like that, like sage is actually a wonderful thing to be able to put into that with some thyme. So those are kind of like what people a lot of times associate with fall flavors. So fantastic way to be able to, kind of bring some of those flavor profiles out as well. But like maybe like Jamaican, it might be something like cayenne or something like in the spicier profile, a little bit of garlic, black pepper, nice flavor combinations there too. But there's so many different flavor profiles to be able to create out of these spice blends. So what I would probably do is look through a well-known spice provider to be able to look at one. I have one here in Madison called Penzies Spices. They actually deliver spices on a nationwide level too. But there are a lot of different spice companies out there. I'm not saying to go right to Penzies. That just came to mind right away. But look at some of the spice blends that they have themselves and then break them down to see what it is. And a lot of times people will call them generic flavors, like Italian. There's Italian seasoning. It's a very popular thing. You can find it almost every grocery store. And that's just that same, combination of herbs I was talking about earlier. Curry is very different depending on where you are in the world. In America, curry is like this yellow turmeric-ish looking powder. But in India, curry is like every spice, right? It's not just one particular blend of spice. It's a lot of different kinds of things. So take a look at some spice blends that are already out there, and that might help you in some flavor profiles that you might like, and be able to blend at home too. One of my favorites I use a lot too is a Chinese five spice, which is a great one. Same with garam masala, kind of out in the outskirts of some of these flavor blends too. So definitely take a look at some of those and look at the ingredient labels to see what's in those, because that might help you on your adventure into spices. Because it's a wonderful world, and the more you can get the whole spices, and then grind them yourself, the more flavor you're going to get out of them too. It's just a fantastic way of cooking. You can use a mortar and pestle. You can use a lot of people use coffee grinders that are just specifically for their spices. Don't put coffee in it as well, because it'll make everything taste like coffee. But yeah, so a great, really wonderful way to open up into the world of spices. Just check that out, and maybe the Flavor Bible as well. So thanks for all your questions, Patricia. And thank you, everybody, for all your questions today for our office hours and Ask Me Anything. This is actually the end of our session, and we'll see you for our next open hour or open office hours. Have a wonderful day from Ruby.